give Scott the floor, and just we're just going to ask some questions. And if there's anything that you would like to say that's going on before we start with the questions, it's all yours, Scott.
I'm sure I'll touch on that as you ask the question. So fire away.
Okay, thank you. My first question would be, what is the difference between the total numbers in any army and the actual fighting force? Like, what is the ratio? How many supporting troops are needed to support the fighting force?
Well, every military is different, but generally speaking, the tail is much bigger than the head. So for every combatant you have at the front, there's a significant number of people in the rear area enabling that combatant to do their job. Logisticians are extremely important. The people that bring the ammunition, bring the water, bring the food, yeah, communicators, the people that create connectivity for things. The staffs, the planning staffs, the operational people, the intelligence staffs. Um, there's just a huge tail in the back, especially in modern warfare, where you know there's maintenance issues. There's the technology of modern conflict is much more advanced than it was in the past. So, when you say, for instance, that you have 200,000 people assigned to the conflict, you may only have 50, 60,000 actual combatants. Everybody else is in a supporting role.
All right. Okay. My second question, and these are questions from viewers, from subscribers. Um, how can Russia win long term when it's clear that the U.S. will never stop funding Ukraine resistance or lift sanctions on Russia? It would seem a long term strategic defeat is inevitable. Inevitable.
Well, I agree that a long-term strategic defeat is inevitable, but I think the questioner is saying that it's Russia that's going to suffer the defeat. No, I actually think it's NATO and the United States. The sanctions issue. I think it's clear that Russia has gotten the better hand on that one. They've been better at causing sanctions pushback to the West, and the West has been causing sanctions damage to Russia. And things are only going to get worse for the West as the winter months approach. On the military side, I think they hit it on the head. This conflict will never end so long as there is a Ukraine capable of receiving military assistance from NATO. Russia isn't going to attack NATO and eliminate NATO. So if you're going to resolve this issue, you have to eliminate Ukraine. You have to eliminate that which is receiving the weapons. And the Russians have pretty much hinted that that's their objective. Denazification is one of the stated goals. Russia has made it clear that they fully intend on achieving that objective. And the Russian government has labeled the Zelensky government as a Nazi government. So it's clear that denazification now includes the Zelensky government. So this conflict will end when Russia terminates the current Ukrainian state as it's currently configured from the government on down. We already see the Russians are in the process of shrinking Ukraine, and I believe Ukraine will further shrink as this conflict goes on. The Ukrainians have made a decision to basically declare the Russian people subhuman. And so when you have significant Russian populations in districts like Odessa and Kharkov, I don't see how this conflict ends without Russia asserting its sovereign control over what it calls the Russian nation. And that Russian nation includes Kharkov, Odessa, and maybe some others. Dnipropetrovsk might be something that they might be interested in. Uh, Nikolaev is another area. So, the sad thing is the Ukrainians could have terminated, it could have made all this not happen had they simply agreed to the Minsk Accords. But Ukraine opted out, deciding that instead they were going to work with NATO to create an offensive military capability designed to not only seize control of the Donbass, but also seize control of Crimea. Now, I just want to bring up the Donbass again because a popular term in the West is that these are Russian separatists, as if they're to blame, but they're not Russian separatists. They're actually Ukrainian patriots. And the reason why I bring that up is we have to look at cause and effect. There was an illegal CIA-backed coup d'état run by neo-Nazi groups, Right Sector, Sloboda, and others, um, overthrow the duly elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, and replace him with a hand-picked American government. This is, these are the usurpers, the coup plotters, and they seized control through a violent, action, which we call Maidan. People call it the Ukrainians have a different name for it, but the fact is, it was a CIA-backed coup, and the separatists that we call separatists are really nothing more than Ukrainian citizens who said, no, we continue to support the legally appointed president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych. We don't support the illegally installed ultranationalists who launched this coup d'état. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, it puts what happened in the Donbass in sharper contrast. A lot of people say this is about Russia coming in and interfering in the internal affairs of Ukraine. It's actually about Ukrainian citizens refusing to accept an unconstitutional removal from power of a duly elected president. Russia early on in 2014 did not support when these people, these supporters of Yanukovych, these Russians, ethnic Russians in the Donbass, said, if the coup plotters are going to seize control in Kiev, we don't want to be a part of that. Therefore, we declare independence. Russia said, no, you're part of sovereign Ukraine. We need to resolve this issue diplomatically to retain the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So that was Russia's goal all along. The vehicle to do that was the Minsk II Accords. Russia diligently pursued the Minsk Accords, trying to get the Ukrainian government to do its duty to ratify and implement the required legislation that was set forth in Minsk. But the Ukrainian government wasn't going to do that. We know Peter Poroshenko said it was a sham. It was a sham the whole time. It was designed to buy time so that NATO could build up a military force, a Ukrainian military force capable of completing the mission of extending the coup through the Donbass. So that's the roots of this conflict. And it's important to understand that because the government in Kiev has no legitimacy, none whatsoever. It's an illegitimate government, made even more so by the fact that Zelensky has basically sold his soul to the very people who carried out the coup in 2014, these right-wing neo-Nazi supporters of Stepan Bandera.
Okay. Number three is, what would Scott say to those that claim that there was no agreement for non-expansion of NATO eastward?
I'd say history shows otherwise. We have the words of the Western leaders who made the agreement. We know that the Soviet leadership believed that such an agreement existed. The fact that it wasn't codified in a treaty form, I think that's where most people are saying that it was a verbal agreement, therefore it wasn't a real agreement. Okay, if that's the game you want to play, then that's the game you play, and but it doesn't change the fact that Russia, first the Soviet Union and then later Russia, was strongly opposed to NATO expansion, and that they believed that a deal had been made that got the Soviet Union to withdraw 400,000 troops from East Germany so that Germany could be reunified. A lot of people are focusing on the NATO expansion. Let's focus for a second on German reunification and what that means. Germany, the reason why Germany was divided was because it used to be called Nazi Germany, and it declared war against the world. It occupied much of Europe. Maverick is as upset with the Nazis as anybody, but it occupied Western Europe had declared war on the Soviet Union and engaged in a conflict that killed 27 million Soviet citizens. And it was defeated unconditionally. There was no surrender. I mean, yeah, they signed a surrender document, but it's not like the Germans negotiated a surrender. They were crushed, defeated, and divided and occupied. Occupied. That means that their fate was in the hands of the people who occupied them. Now, the West decided that it was going to incorporate the western part. There was no significant denazification in Western Germany. In fact, we took the Gehlen organization, which was the Wehrmacht's intelligence organization from fighting on the Eastern Front, and we just incorporated it straight into the CIA, straight up. Went from supporting the Nazis to supporting the United States. And then it became the German intelligence organization, the BND. Krupp, all these industrialists who supported the Nazis, the Russians are like, take them down, take them down. Everybody got to dismantle this war machine. We didn't dismantle the war machine. We kept the war machine alive. All the industrialists who made money off of Adolf Hitler started making money off of NATO. Politicians who supported the Nazi cause were rehabilitated. Scientists were brought to the United States. We went to the moon because of Werner von Braun. So there was an incomplete process where I think West Germany, basically forgot their roots, forgot who they were for a moment. The East Germans never forgot because the Soviets wouldn't let them forget. The Soviets were there to remind them every day, what they were. And from frankly speaking, from the Soviet perspective, what they still were, if there wasn't going to be a peace treaty. And people don't understand, there was never a peace treaty during the entire Cold War, because the West didn't want a peace treaty. The West didn't want the kind of clarity that comes from defining the post-war requirements of a unified Germany. Do you let Germany have significant industrial base? What political controls will exist to ensure that Germany never again raises its head in the form of something that replicates Nazi Germany? These are questions that were never answered because the West didn't want them answered. And suddenly the wall comes down in 1989 and Germany's reunified, and the Soviets are going, we're not keen with this. We're not happy. One of the key aspects of reunification was that there needed to be a peace treaty. And so all these conditions were, a peace treaty, then the Soviets would have to leave, the occupation would have to end. And the Soviets were a little uneasy about this. And that's why they said, if we're going to do all this, we need assurances that NATO isn't going to expand into Eastern Germany. When we leave, there's not a vacuum created. NATO doesn't expand. NATO stays where it's at. There's no need for NATO to expand because the threat has gone away. There's no more Warsaw Pact. There's no more Soviet forces, in East Germany. This was the agreement. So anybody who says there wasn't, you're just full of it. I mean, I'm pushing back as hard as I can. Read goddamn history. Study the facts. Understand the context. Stop pretending that Germany is a benign, a benign nation. It's not. Germany was never denazified, not fully. And we brought it back and we cobbled it together in a haphazard fashion. And then we violated our agreement to the Soviets because they were concerned. They were concerned about the ramifications of a unified Germany without complete denazification. And look what we have today. We have Germans talking about, remilitarizing, building a massive military oriented towards the east, marching through Poland to confront Russia. Hey, that's what the Russians wanted to avoid. So no, if you think for a second that this is just Russian propaganda, you're wrong. You're just as dead wrong as you can be. Yeah, there's not a treaty. Should there have been? If I were Gorbachev, I would have damn well insisted on one. I would have used those 400,000 troops as leverage and told the West, you ain't moving anywhere. Germany might think it's united, but we won the war. And if the East German government collapsed, that's fine. We're the occupying power. We'll just come in and crush the son of a bitches and take over. Is that what you want, West? Because we're willing to do it unless you're willing to sign a treaty. Gorbachev didn't. Gorbachev was promoting glasnost. He was promoting perestroika. He trusted the West too much. He took a handshake agreement with James Baker. He took a handshake agreement with the German foreign minister. He took a handshake agreement with the French. verbal agreement from the British, from everybody. Everybody said, "Oh, don't worry about it, man. Not 1 inch eastward. Don't worry about it." The West lied. The West always intended. When James Baker came back and said, "Hey, I got this agreement with Gorbachev and Shevardnadze," the National Security Council said, "No, no, no, you don't have an agreement because, see, we don't intend to honor that. We intend to expand NATO because our job is to keep the foot on the Russian neck. Our job is to keep the Soviet Union down. We've won the Cold War. We're not going to let them rise back up. We're going to expand NATO to constrain this power." That has always been the Western objective.
Okay, my next question is your reference to 40, 50, 60% casualty ratio for Wagner musician was it hypothetical or factual, and how those numbers came about?
It's supposition on my part. Wagner hasn't published casualty figures. The closest thing we have is the the head of Wagner speaking to. There was a video released where he was speaking to convicts, hardcore convicts in a Russian penal colony, and he was given the opportunity to basically regain their honor through fire. If they joined Wagner and they behaved honorably, that at the end of their service, their records would be wiped clean and they could return to Russian society, um, you know, rehabilitated men. So it's rehabilitation through combat. And he spoke of, a lot of people said, "Oh, good, look how desperate the Russians are. They're going in and recruiting prisoners." Wagner's been recruiting prisoners for a long time. I think Wagner's been recruiting prisoners from day one. I think this concept of rehabilitation by fire is something that has allowed Wagner to do it, which is why Wagner has a unique funding mechanism separate from the Ministry of Defense, which under normal circumstances wouldn't allow criminals into their ranks. But he spoke of a previous group that had been sent to the front lines, and he spoke of a very heavy casualty rate. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm extrapolating from the casualty rate. He said that we don't do defense, we do offense. We're an assault force. Our job is to, assault, the position, take territory, and that's bloody work. It's bloody work, and Wagner's doing it very well. They don't publish their casualty figures. One of the reasons why I think they can get away with that is because the guys that are leading the assault, many of them are criminals. Many of them are also very experienced Russian special operators who get sheep dipped, meaning that the 1 minute they're with the 45th Spetsnaz Brigade, the next minute they get west and they become Wagner, and then maybe they can transition back to the 45th. It all depends on the legal construct of the conflict that they're fighting in. But it's an extrapolation on my part. There is no published data, and I could be very wrong. But I'm just going off of the hints that the head of Wagner provided when he spoke of the previous combat experience and fates of those convicts who were sent to the front.
Okay. Do you think the cooperation between Russia and Turkey will last? The conflict in Armenia and Kyrgyzstan seems to be annoying Russia. Is Turkey related with this conflict, and how important is it for Russia in the Aegean Sea, Tanos, Greece?
I didn't understand the last part about Greece.
Tanos, Greece, or Tanos, Greece?
I'll try to answer the question. First of all, we know that Turkey is supporting Azerbaijan in its conflict against Armenia. This conflict goes back to, first of all, it's a historical conflict. It goes way back in modern times during the Soviet period and even pre-Soviet period. There was ethnic conflict between the Azeri Turks and the Armenians. The Azeris carried out pogroms against the Armenians. The Armenians carried out massacres of the Azeris. Neither side is innocent in this matter. During the First World War, the Armenians rose up of Turkey, rose up against the Ottoman Empire on the side of the Russian the Imperial Russia. And when the Turks regained the initiative and reconquered the lands, they found out that the Armenians had slaughtered millions of Turks. And so the decision was made to forcefully remove the Armenians from this critical buffer zone under the pretense that the Armenians could no longer be trusted. They were siding with the enemy. And there was a very ugly evacuation. There were atrocities committed by the Turks. The actual death toll isn't fully known, but it was a significant number of Armenians who died, murdered, starved to death, butchered, raped. I mean, whatever term you want to use, it's there's no way to sugarcoat it. But they were removed from Anatolia near the Russian border, and they were removed down into the Middle East. Many of them were relocated to Syria, in that region. The fact that Armenians made it to Syria and were alive, I think, is proof positive that this wasn't genocide, because genocide means you're out to eradicate. This was just a brutally conducted, forced evacuation, and the Armenians had to march through territories run by Kurds and other ethnic groups that fell on them, preyed, robbed them, murdered them, stole their women, stole their children, slaughtered the men. It was not a good time to be Armenian. And so there's historical antipathy with cause between the Armenians and the Turks. The Armenians have been seeking justice ever since then. They've been seeking international recognition of what happened to them during this period of time as genocide. And so Turkey and Armenia have been at odds politically since the end of the First World War. Armenia, recognizing the Turkish position, has historically aligned itself with Russia. Again, dating back to World War I and to the modern times. Even though Armenia is an independent nation, they've allowed Russian bases, military bases, to remain on their territory, and they've joined a treaty organization, the CSTO, Commonwealth States Treaty Organization, and that's the case. In 1989, I guess 88, there's an enclave inside Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh that's populated by Armenians. So you basically have Armenia, next door you have Azerbaijan, and within Azerbaijan you have this enclave called Nagorno-Karabakh. In 1988, they declared independence from Azerbaijan and indicated that they wanted to be linked with Armenia, Armenians with Armenians. This began a conflict that in 1993 broke out, and the Armenians won. They actually were able to seize control of around 20% of Azerbaijani territory. They were able to link up with Nagorno-Karabakh, unify it with Armenia. There was a ceasefire declared, and ever since then, from 1993 until 2022 or 2021, the international community had been working to find a peaceful resolution. Azerbaijan wanted its territory restored to it, and it wanted, the world to recognize that Nagorno-Karabakh was Azerbaijani. There needed to be, they were saying they're willing to allow for autonomy, respect Armenian rights there. But ethnic conflict is mind-numbingly, it just numbs the mind. Once you start saying, I'm Armenian, you're Azerbaijani, and you start killing people based upon their ethnicity, it's very difficult to turn that switch off. And both sides are guilty of atrocities. Both sides are guilty of torturing, murdering, showing disrespect, not caring for civilian life. Because how can you care for civilians? If you're an Azeri, that's an Armenian village, that's not, a civilian. Those are Armenians. You kill them. They're subhuman. And the Armenians are the same way. Those Azeris, those are Turks. They're subhuman. And that kind of war, it's very difficult to resolve that kind of hatred. Ethnic wars, some of the most difficult, conflicts in the history of conflict, because there's so much hate. And so the Turks decided that they were going to assist the Azeris in recapturing their territory. And the Turks provided training, they provided equipment, they provided drones. These drones that we've seen operating in Ukraine. We saw their appearance in a big way in the 2021 conflict. And the Azeris launched an offensive and recaptured much of their territory, and defeated the Armenian army, forcing the Armenians to sue for peace. And part of the peace agreement was that Nagorno-Karabakh would be considered Azeri territory with significant Armenian autonomy. But one of the questions was how that was going to look. How are you going to implement that? And then the Armenians agreed that they would continue to return Azeri territory. There was talk about a corridor that would link Armenia with Nagorno-Karabakh. All these things were to be worked out, but the Armenians dragged their feet, even though they had been defeated in the war. Politically, the idea of acknowledging that Nagorno-Karabakh was now Azeri territory was a non-starter for many. So the Armenian government has been under pressure from within, from the political opposition and many people in the street who just refuse to accept any concession to Azerbaijan as a national embarrassment and national disgrace. And so this is why the fighting is revved up. It's not like Turkey is sitting there priming the pump or the CIA secretly pulling strings. This is a historical conflict. What I mean by historical, it's a conflict with historic roots that predate what's going on in Ukraine, predate a lot of stuff. Does that mean that people can't be blowing on flame? Yeah, sure, people can, but this is a conflict more about the problems between Armenia and Azerbaijan than it is about the problems between the United States and Russia, or Turkey trying to bully Russia, et cetera. I think this has just been a decades long, if not centuries long, thorn in the side of regional stability, and it will continue to be so unless a path towards peace can be found. And to have peace, you're going to need Turkey working together with Russia. There won't be peace unless both Turkey and Russia are on board, because Russia, of course, backs Armenia, Turkey backs Azerbaijan. Therefore, you need the sponsors at the table as well as the primary combatants. Somebody mentioned Greece. I don't want to I don't want to make the answer too long, but Turkey has historic issues with Greece as well. The president of Turkey, Recep Erdogan, recently chastised the Greeks for disregarding treaty obligations not to militarize islands off the coast of Turkey. They put military equipment on there. Turkey therefore says you violated the agreement. Therefore, you no longer have sovereignty over the islands. They revert to us. They're our islands. We're going to take them back. And then he reminded the Greeks. He said, "Never forget what happened in Smyrna in 1922." Well, Smyrna is called Izmir today. In 1922, the Turkish forces under Mustafa Kemal drove the Greeks out. 200,000 were literally driven into the sea. Given the choice to drown, die by fire, be bayoneted, or hopefully get rescued by ships. There was a whole Allied fleet off the coast. But a significant number of Greeks were killed. They were ethnically cleansed from Izmir, and so for Erdogan to bring this up was an indication to the Greeks that there would be no mercy in any future Greek-Turkey conflict. But remember, they're both NATO members. So any Greek-Turkey conflict is NATO going to war against itself, which is going to be further exacerbated by the fact that France has said it will fight alongside Greece. So you got a little intramural firefight in NATO going on while NATO's supposed to be theoretically unified to confront Russia and Ukraine.
The last part of the question is, how important is it for Russia in the agency? Because I also heard about something about going on with the Russian naval. So I don't know if that's part of it.
The Russians in the Aegean Sea?
Yes.
Well, the Aegean Sea separates Greece and Turkey. The Russians have a naval presence in the in Syria, the port of Tartus, but the Russians aren't actively patrolling the Aegean Sea. They have ships out there, but their primary purpose right now is to patrol off the coast of Syria because they have a significant Russian force in Syria. I think more important for Russia is the Bosphorus, the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. That is the straits that separate Europe from Asia. Turkey is astride both, And by treaty, Russia is allowed, is guaranteed access. And one of the things that prevents Russia from ever saying, because Russia, is a Black Sea nation, and they need to be able to get out of the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, the sea lane connectivity, and they can't have a situation where Turkey can just arbitrarily shut down the straits. So there's a treaty, a Montrose Convention, I believe, that guarantees this. Turkey can shut down combatant vessels, and they've done that. They've done that. They've prevented Russian warships from traversing because of the conflict in Ukraine. But Turkey needs to be careful because Turkey's trying to play a game right now. They're digging a canal that is parallel to the Bosphorus. That they will say, we control the canal and we'll divert all shipping to the canal, and we can determine who goes through that canal or not. That just invites, the historic Russian claim on Constantinople and the need for Russian control over the sea lanes. It's counterproductive in every sense of the word. It doesn't mean that Russia is going to invade today or ever, but Russia does have a vested interest in guaranteeing sea lines of communication between the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, and the rest of the world. And Turkey should think twice before yielding to pressure from the United States and Europe to politicize the Bosphorus.
So you don't think that the Russian Navy is in hiding because after they lost to Moscow?
I mean, ask the citizens of Lvov, Odessa, Nikolaev, Kiev. They get pounded by caliber missiles launched from Russian ships on a daily basis. I don't see the fleet hiding. I see the fleet taking the appropriate measures necessary to avoid being in the lethal range of any potential Ukrainian anti-ship missiles. But you bring up an important point. So long as Ukraine controls Odessa and the coastline, the Black Sea, the Russian fleet will be at risk, which is another reason why I think when this conflict is ended, Odessa will not be under Ukrainian control.
Okay. What are your thoughts about the Jews who are fleeing Russia to Israel and the roots of the Jewish neocon hatred of the white Russian race?
Well, there we go. That question is so loaded. I got to be careful how I answer because I'm not anti-Semitic and I don't want to be portrayed as anti-Semitic.
Right.
Historically, we know that the Russian Jews have been subjected to pogroms in time immemorial. Go back to Tsarist Russia, go back to the 19th century, and we just see case after case after case of whenever Russia was having difficult domestic times, blame the Jews, and then the Cossacks ride through and trample them, kill them, rape them, murder them. So the Jews were a perpetual punching bag for Tsarist Russia. I guess that's what they mean by white Russia. I don't know. When the revolution came, if you take a look at the ranks of the Bolsheviks, many of the Bolsheviks were Jewish. And so one could say that the Bolsheviks were a vehicle of empowerment of the Jews to respond to Tsarist Russia. We also know that during this period of time, many Jews did leave Russia. They went to the United States, and some immigrated to Palestine. It wasn't Israel at the time, it was Palestine. But this that set the precedent of a Jewish migration out of Russia to Palestine. And many of the early settlers in Palestine were East European Jews, many of them from Russia. So the early kibbutzes were dominated by Eastern European Jews, Russian Jews, Polish Jews, Romanian Jews. But when World War II ended, the Soviet Union it put restrictions on immigration, and even before World War II, during the Soviet times, they were not encouraging immigration to Israel. They they kept the Jews in the Soviet territory. And I think in 1968, the issue of Jewish immigration became to the front. A Russian Jew went to the Israeli consulate and created a scandal that compelled Israel to start taking seriously the issue of getting Jews out of the Soviet Union. The United States came on board in the 1970s. There was the Jackson, and there's another name I can't remember, but it was an amendment that basically imposed sanctions on Russia or on the Soviet Union, so long as they restricted Jewish immigration. When the Soviet Union collapsed, we saw a massive release of Jews from Ukraine, from Russia, elsewhere to Israel. Literally, the Israeli population went from 5 million to over 6 million. So, we're talking a significant increase. And this, Israel always was a nation of tight, political competition between the left and the right. The Russian Jews primarily aligned themselves with the political right, with the Likud, and now they've even gone, made their own parties, and it changed the political landscape of Israel decisively, and to the detriment of the Palestinian people, because the Russian Jews coming in lacked the history and the empathy and even the sympathy that the longstanding Jews, the Jews that came over in the 19th century, early 20th century, formed the initial kibbutzes and settlements. While their relationship wasn't perfect with the Palestinians, at least they understood each other. But the Russian Jews didn't even want to understand the Palestinian issue, and that's had I think, a very radicalizing impact on Jewish politics. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's where I stand on that.
Okay. This is my question. This is a question that I came up with. Why would Putin allow a prisoner swap, especially with the Azovs?
That is the $1 million question. And then it comes down to what's more important: your commitment to the men who serve the motherland, or politics. And I believe Putin made the right decision. I know there's people that disagree with it. I know there's people that are furious about it, especially the combatants, the Chechens, I know, are extraordinarily upset about this, rightfully so. I mean, they gave their blood to liberate Mariupol, to defeat the Azov regiment, to capture these guys. And they were told, you don't kill them, you capture them. We treat them properly. We take them to prison. We bind their wounds. We feed them. We shelter them. We don't torture them because we're going to put them on trial. We're doing it the right way. So that was the promise. Capture these guys, treat them well, and justice will be dealt out. And then to see them exchanged was a gut punch for the Chechens, for many of the Donetsk People's Militia, again, who were fighting there valiantly against. I mean, remember we talked earlier. I talked about we don't want to call I don't think I view the Donetsk Russians as separatists. They're actually the patriots, the people who support the legitimate government of Ukraine. But they were the ones being hunted down and killed by Azov, by the ultranationalists, by the Stepan Bandera Nazi followers. And so here they were defeating. This is like having a Jewish military unit defeating the SS death squads in combat. That's the equivalent. The victims were now armed and going after their oppressors, and they defeated them. And instead of slaughtering them, they took them prisoner under the promise that that justice would be seen out, and justice wasn't. They were exchanged. So I understand totally where they're coming from. But now you're the commander in chief, and you're looking at the men who serve in your military have been taken prisoner of war, and you see the videos of them being shot, tortured, eyes gouged out, castrated. you have a responsibility to them as well to bring them home. You have a responsibility to the families of these service members. So you got to put that on a scale. And it's a tough decision. It's a really tough decision. But I personally believe he made the right decision. Why? Azov was defeated. Whoever you return, I don't know the conditions. I don't know if they were paroled, but if they go back to the front line and they're captured a second time, I don't think you're going to see their name on any prisoner of war roster. The Chechens have made that clear. The Chechen leader said, "What you're telling us is that we don't take Nazis prisoners," and this could lead to the kind of atrocities the Russians have avoided to date, because the Russians have actually behaved very properly. But this exchange might make the conditions where they just refuse to take Nazis prisoner. Doesn't mean they're going to shoot them. After they surrender, it just means that they're not going to respect any surrender. They're just going to keep firing and claim they never saw the white flag. They never saw the arms go up. All they saw was the gun. And that's not a good thing. But getting the boys home, I mean, all you had to do is see the videos of them reunited with their families and understand they did the right thing, and did the right thing not only for them, but it's a promise made to every Russian service member that you will not be left behind. You have guys right now going to war, and there's a likelihood that many of them are going to be taken prisoner. I mean, war is a to and fro thing. The Ukrainians every once in a while get the upper hand, and when they do, they capture Russians. On the one hand, this exchange gives the Ukrainians an incentive to treat their prisoners with more dignity than historically they have. But you have a bond with your troops, a commitment that you will not be left behind, that we will bring you home. You will never be forgotten. And I think Russia lived up to its obligation. It honored its commitment to the men who served them proudly. And so I think when you weigh the two things, the right decision was made, but it was a tough decision. It was a very tough decision, and it has the potential for serious ramifications.
Okay. I thought it was because one of Putin's one of his friends was also a commander, was also released, or also.
No, there's a Ukrainian politician. There's a Ukrainian politician who was pro-Russian, who was prisoner. He was part of the swap, and I think that was to sweeten the deal in order to get the commander of Azov. I mean, swaps are political in nature. There was negotiation taking place, but at the end of the day, this was about getting Russian soldiers home to their families.
Okay. There was a report that 7 high-ranking commanding officers were eliminated in Kherson due to the HIMARS supplied by the U.S. What impact are the HIMARS having in the Russian-Ukraine war? And this is the second part of the question, and is Putin's threat of nuclear weapons used related to the incident or the impact of the HIMARS and other weapons being supplied to Ukraine by the U.S. and its NATO allies?
Well, I've been saying this for some time now, and it's been pretty much confirmed by the New York Times and others that it's when you provide a weapon system like the HIMARS, the high mobility artillery rocket system, you don't just get the weapon system, you get the support that comes with it. And the HIMARS is not only has range, but it has accuracy. And that accuracy, it will, if you designate a grid, a coordinate, a geo coordinate, it's going to hit very close to that. And when you have U.S. intelligence and NATO intelligence scouring the battlefield, looking for Russian command and control, looking for targets, viable targets for the HIMARS system, they will find where Russian commanders have come together for a meeting. They broadcast this in real time. You have in Poland now, you have American intelligence analysts who get the intelligence, and the Ukrainians have an app on a tablet, and the Americans send them the intelligence. hit, and Ukrainians go, boom, there it is. And they bring the HIMARS up. The Americans also say, this is probably your best approach for the HIMARS to a launch area here. We have indicate, we take a look at the Russian force disposition. Counter battery fires aren't immediately available for this area, so you can come here and fire. We estimate that you have 10 minutes to evacuate and get to a hide site. Here's a recommended hide site. So the U.S. is controlling every aspect of the operation of this. And then the Ukrainians go in, launch the HIMARS, hit the target. That's called war. The Russians are doing the same thing to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians get together and the Russians detect it. The Russians hit it and they kill them. The HIMARS have given the Ukrainians the ability to do unto Russia what Russia has done unto others. It's called war. But it's not like the Russians aren't a mature military. Remember, they've been training to fight NATO. So it's not like the Russians don't know what HIMARS is. In fact, if this was a NATO conflict, they'd be seeing a lot more HIMARS. And the Russian military builds into its doctrinal approach to combat resilience, duplication of command, et cetera. So by killing these, if this report is true and they killed, this command node, it's not like the Russians freeze and cease. A professional service will immediately transfer comms to, transfer command to the, to the alternate command post, and they'll keep on moving. That's what modern professional militaries do. What it has done is increase the cost to Russia of this conflict, which is why you have President Putin speaking of not just a conflict with Russia, but the collective West. That he doesn't view the Ukrainian military as a standalone element. He views it as part of the collective West. And Russia is fighting the collective West. And HIMARS is a weapon system that I think personifies what the collective West is. It's a Western system manned and operated by Ukrainians, but every aspect of its operation is controlled by the United States, by NATO.
Okay, is there any truth to the report that Putin's decision to partially mobilize Russian reservists has sparked a mass exodus of men fleeing Russia to avoid fighting in Ukraine? And to follow up that question, in your opinion, what is the consensus among the average Russian citizen on the conflict in Ukraine?
Well, again, I'm remote, so it's not like I'm walking around Russia with a microphone, doing a man on the street type interview kind of thing. And you have to be careful of any information you receive on, from the internet, because you just don't.
Right.
The sources. You should treat every source as suspect until proven otherwise. Let's look at some just basic realities. Everybody calls Putin a dictator. He's a dictator. He's an autocrat, and the assumption is that he seeks to have 100% control over every aspect of Russian society. This is just false, straight up false. While it may not be a Western-style Jeffersonian democracy, Russia is a democracy. People go and vote for Vladimir Putin to be president. And it's not like a Saddam Hussein election where 99.99% of the people voted for Saddam. It's a genuine democratic election where there is an opposition. There are opposition candidates. Yes, they may not, be able to get traction because of the dominance of state media that the government has, et cetera. I'm not going to say it. Like I said, it's not Jeffersonian democracy, but we know that historically, somewhere in the area of 30 to 40% of the Russian population don't support Vladimir Putin. They don't, straight up don't. That doesn't mean they all support Navalny. They support different candidates. Some support the Communist Party, some support other parties, but they're not pro-Putin. Now, what we saw when this war started is that some of those people came over to support Putin, not necessarily because they think Putin's the greatest thing since sliced bread, but because Putin is the commander in chief in a conflict that pits Russia against, forces that represent a threat to Russia. So they've rallied around their patriotic duty, but there's still a significant element that just doesn't have anything to do with this. There's people that don't support this conflict whatsoever. And the Russian government has passed laws that made opposition to this conflict, unattractive. You can go to jail for a long time. But they're there. And so it's a nation of 150 million, and let's just say that let's just say 20%, and that's probably a low ball. We could probably go up to 30%, but you're talking 30 to 45 million people don't agree with this war, don't agree with the war. That's a lot of people, and so what happens though? They say thousands of people demonstrating in the streets. Well, when you have 45 million people in opposition, and most of those people in opposition are concentrated in the principal um, cosmopolitan regions of Russia, for instance, in Moscow, St. Petersburg. So let's say in Moscow we have 2 million people who are against Putin, maybe more, 5 million, who knows? But they only get 1,000 people in the streets. That's not really a huge anti-war demonstration, which tells you that a lot of this might be more about generating imagery for TV. And we know this is a Western tactic. We know that the color revolution model has a citizenry empowered with social media, the ability to take video, upload it, disseminate it to a West willing to rebroadcast that video in a manner that shapes perception, even though it's not necessarily the truth. And the Western media does this as well. They go out and they take film and then they edit it to meet their requirements, et cetera. We also know that the anti-Russian, the anti-Putin Russians are fully aware of the points that need to be hit, and that many of them may be fleeing this country not because they believe they're going to be arrested or conscripted, but because they're part of a larger scheme to undermine Putin, to create the impression of a nation in a disarray. The vast majority of the men, I struggle to call them that, but the men who are fleeing, the duty to their country, wouldn't have been called up to begin with. These are guys who never served in the military. They have deferments, et cetera, but they're anti-Putin, and by fleeing in large numbers, they are creating the impression of a Russia in disarray. And the Russian government sometimes helps further this impression. I mean, what we're finding out is while the majority of the military commissars and commissariats did exactly what they were supposed to do with the money allocated to them by the Russian government to have sufficient stockpiles of equipment, kept the equipment up to date, modern, clean, ready to receive, with an effective plan to implement the plan. Some weren't. Some took that money and put it in their pockets, went and had a big vacation in Turkey. Those people are being discovered because it's hard to hide it when the recruits show up and they're supposed to receive a brand spanking new Russian-made assault rifle, and they get an old rusty one. And somebody takes a picture of it. It goes on the internet. First of all, again, it gets broadcast everywhere. It shows, oh, look, the Russians suck. They're not able to do this. But the fact is, it means that somebody failed. And the person that failed is eliminated. I don't mean killed. They're arrested, removed from the job. They'll be prosecuted for crimes. They're replaced by somebody who's competent, and the recruits will get the nice new rifle they need to do their job. So there's this going on. That the thing is about these the images of people leaving. Yes, the people are leaving. There's no doubt about that, and there are large numbers of them. No doubt about that as well. But to focus on that means you're ignoring the reality that 300,000 guys are being mobilized very effectively, very efficiently, and generally with massive support of the Russian people. There's, for every video that shows, a guy fleeing to Georgia or Kazakhstan, there's a couple videos showing, hundreds, if not thousands, of these newly mobilized guys boarding buses with a concerned but supportive population cheering them on. Women are crying. Who wouldn't cry if your husband's going off to war? I mean, have you ever seen a Marine unit deploy? Yes, you have. Okay, what happens when the Marines, you have that moment where the Marines are getting ready to get on the bus, go to the plane, fly, and the families are there. Are the women high-fiving each other, or are they crying? Are the children crying? Are the Marines crying? I mean, it's a tough thing. These guys are going to war. It doesn't mean that they're anti-war, that they're anti-this. It means that they're sad that their loved one's going off and may not come home. So, every scene has to be put into perspective. But, Russia right now, is an interesting time, but to create this perception that Russia's on the verge of collapse is just false. I mean, that's like saying that I remember in 2002, I was in New York City doing I was being interviewed by a TV station, and I left right as the anti-war demonstration was marching through New York City. And there was a lot of people there. I hesitate to give a number, but it might have been 100,000. It's a significant demonstration. And does that mean that the Bush administration was on the verge of collapse because all the people were in the street protesting against the war? No, it doesn't. It means that people were protesting in the street, but the Bush administration was on the verge of collapse. The military was still functioning, government still functioned, things work. That's Russia. There's no panic in Russia right now. You're not seeing panic. Where do you see panic? In Kiev with Zelensky's government. They're panicked. Where do you see panic? In Brussels with NATO. They're panicked. Where do you see panic? In Strasbourg with the European Union. They're panicked. In Washington, D.C., they're panicked. The whole collective West is panicked. And Russia's just like, yep, bye-bye. Let's go. Let's finish. Let's get the job done.
Okay. This one is, where is the Russian Navy? According to former Commander Ben Hodges, before February, the Black Sea Fleet controlled the entire Black Sea and was unchallenged. However, now 6 months later, after sinking the Russian flagship, the Moskva, and a few other Russian vessels, he claims that the Russian Navy, the Black Sea Fleet, is basically hiding behind Crimea and is terrified to go anywhere near the Ukrainian coastline.
Wow. Okay, Ben, stick to land warfare. He's an Army general, former commander of U.S. forces in Europe. I mean, it's ludicrous. During the Gulf War, we were sending the U.S. fleet towards the Kuwaiti coast, and a number of our ships hit mines. And as a result, we made a decision not to sail the fleet that close to the coast. We pulled back. Does that mean the U.S. fleet was hiding? I don't know. Ask any Iraqi that's on the receiving end of 16-inch naval gunfire from the Iowa and the Missouri. I don't know if the Missouri is there, but Iowa is definitely there. No. Ask anybody who, F-18s, A-7s, A-6s were being launched from carriers and blowing the hell out of the Iraqis. Ask anybody who, had to deal with Navy SEALs operating off the flight decks of various naval vessels. The U.S. Navy wasn't out of the fight. The U.S. Navy just simply altered its operations to respect the reality of the threat that existed. The Russian Navy isn't hiding. The Russian Navy has altered its operations to respect the threat that exists. Thanks to NATO and the United States, Ukraine has acquired anti-shipping capability that makes it dangerous for the Russian fleet to approach too close to the Ukrainian coastline. So the Russians do the smart thing. They pull back outside of the range, but their weapons outrange NATO weapons, and the Russians are still delivering their primary strike capabilities in the form of Caliber missiles launched from these ships. So Hodges simply doesn't know what he's talking about. With all due respect to the Major General, stop. It's propaganda that you're spewing. Any naval professional will tell you that the Russian Navy is fully engaged in the conflict. Yes, they can't operate directly off the coast like they used to. They paid a heavy price by losing their flagship. But study U.S. naval operations in the Pacific during World War II. Study the Battle of Guadalcanal. You're a Marine. You know what I'm talking about. The U.S. Navy got the snot kicked out of it by the Japanese early on in that conflict. But ultimately, even though the fleet had to pull back, the U.S. won that fight. This isn't about a snapshot in time where a missile hits the Moskva sinks, Ukraine wins the war. This is about the totality of the timeline. And the totality of the timeline shows clearly that Russia is in control of the Black Sea and that the Russian fleet is an active participant in the ongoing military operations against Ukraine.
Okay, Scott, I only have two more questions, but before we get to the two questions, I just want to encourage everybody about your book. Um,
There it
to get
is.
your book, to get your book. It's an excellent book. It's a good read, and I'm gonna put the description in the description box. I'm gonna put how they can order it, where they can order it from, and to go make sure they go out and get their copy. So
Did
I
you
just
read it?
wanted, yes,
Did you like it?
I yes,
Okay, there it
I
is.
liked it. If I liked it, I know everybody else would like it. So I just want everybody to just know that this is an awesome, excellent book, and they can get their copy. And I'm going to put all the information in the description box.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, I have two more questions, and we're done. And I appreciate your time. And I know you're a very busy man, and probably everybody's trying to get a hold of you. So I appreciate it.
Marines help Marines, buddy.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it so much. Number five is Turkey's president Erdogan said during an interview on PBS that he would like to see the war in Ukraine end as soon as possible. He stated that he met with Mr. Putin in Uzbekistan and that Mr. Putin gave him the impression that he too wants to end the war as soon as possible. President Erdogan stated that if peace was to be established in Ukraine, returning of the land invaded would become really important. If such a deal was reached, will Russia agree to returning any land if certain regions vote yes on the referendum to become part of Russia? If not likely, what do you think would take for Russia to accept a peace deal?
Erdogan lives in a fantasy world. Um, just I don't think there's a politician alive that wouldn't say we would like a peaceful resolution to this conflict, and the sooner the better. I mean, that's just a statement that everybody makes because it's the right thing. Nobody but a psychopath would want to have to extend the war and wait a minute, isn't that the policy of the United States and NATO? All right, so we now know who the psychopaths are. But Russia would prefer to end this conflict, but Russia has objectives that have to be met: demilitarization, denazification, and permanent neutrality for Ukraine. And Russia's unyielding on this and continues to be unyielding on this. So I don't know what kind of fantasy world Erdogan lives in. I'd also recommend that Erdogan study Russian law and the Russian Constitution and understands that once, and now it appears that the Federal Assembly of Russia isn't going to consider the question of absorbing the four oblasts, regions, provinces, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk that just had, today they're finishing up the referendum. It appears that they've all four have exceeded the 50% threshold, and all have voted overwhelmingly in support of joining Russia. So now there's some legal things that have to occur. A formal application has to be made. The results have to be submitted. The Russian parliament has to consider it. The president has to approve it. It has to go to the Russian the Federal Assembly, and the Federal Assembly says that they're not going to hold a special session. They're going to, this will be considered at the next session, which is October 4th. But once all that is done and Russia approves the absorption of these territories, constitutionally, no Russian leader can just give away territory. And so they're permanently Russia. I know the West says we don't recognize it, but it doesn't matter. Russia will never give it up. So if that's one of the preconditions that Erdogan or Zelensky or NATO or the United States has, it's a non-starter. Russia will never give up these territories ever. It just isn't going to happen. And for any nation to say, therefore, if Russia's not going to willingly give it up, we're going to recapture them through force of arms, you'll be attacking Mother Russia, which is a completely different game. And now, as Putin has said, that invokes the existential survival of the Russian state, and Russia will use all weapons available to it to defend itself. That the implication clear there is nuclear weapons. So Erdogan is just, he drank some funky tea, and he's hiring a kite if he thinks that's going to happen, and so is anybody else. I think you're beginning to see in the West um, a recognition that the best thing that could happen is if the West can stop Russia at four. And what I mean is stop them at the four provinces that they're going to absorb. If this conflict continues, you're more than likely going to get six, which is Odessa and Kharkov added to it. And if they continue, you're going to get eight. Nikolaev and Dnipropetrovsk will be added, which means that Ukraine will lose, close to 40% of its territory, almost half of its territory, because of this conflict. And that will, already Ukraine's economy will be forever impacted by the loss of the Donbass and the loss of Kherson and Zaporizhia. If you take Odessa, you take away all connectivity with the sea. You take away Kharkov, you take away industrial areas, and Dnipropetrovsk, more industrial areas, and Ukraine will. We've had this conversation before. I said one of the big, the cost that Ukraine pays for carrying this out is the real possibility that Ukraine will no longer exist as a nation once this conflict ends. And that's the direction we're heading right now. So people like Erdogan need to start being realistic and stop pretending that somehow because he says something it's going to be so. Putin will never give up Russian territory, and these four oblasts who have participated in this referendum, it appears very clear that they're going to be part of Russia.
Regarding President Putin's statement about the use of nuclear weapons, stating that it was not a bluff when saying that the nuclear option was on the table, obviously taking such a statement lightly would be irresponsible to say the least. And the longer this war continues, it seems that more likely a nuclear conflict could arise. How close are we today, in your eyes, to this turning into a nuclear conflict?
Well, Russia, what Putin said isn't, he didn't invent something out of whole cloth when he spoke. He was simply referring to existing Russian nuclear policy, which simplified says we use nuclear weapons under one of two conditions. One is if we're attacked with nuclear weapons, we will respond in kind. And two, if there is a threat to the survival of the Russian state, meaning people are trying to seize Russian territory. And this is the interesting part, because up until now, the United States and NATO, when they made the decision to inject tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment into Ukraine and extend the conflict, it was also a decision attached to at least from the Ukrainian perspective, that this equipment wasn't being provided to defend Ukraine. This equipment was being provided to reoccupy, to evict Russia from occupied territories. To include the Donbass and Crimea, and NATO bought into this. And this was, the NATO goal was to empower Ukraine to do this, and I called it a game-changing event. We may have had this conversation in the past where I used specifically that term: the provision of tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment to Ukraine for the purpose of building a Ukrainian army capable of carrying out offensive action designed to evict Russia from territory Ukraine believes was theirs. Was a game changer. Russia changed the game, and it's a new game altogether. And now NATO finds itself in a position where it's I call it the horns of a dilemma. They've done a couple things. One, they've gone all in on Ukraine, all in. I mean, tens of billions of dollars, which means not just money but equipment. NATO has literally emptied its arsenals to equip the Ukrainian military to carry out this objective. And the Ukrainian military has burned through this stuff. I mean, even the most recent counteroffensive, which recaptured the Kharkov district, the Ukrainian military, its reserves were depleted. They were killed, the equipment destroyed. And now they're looking to NATO to give them more. So NATO's politically overcommitted itself. How does NATO back away from this new reality? Because we saw right off the bat that the military committee of NATO, which is the real decision maker when it comes to military things, not John Stoltenberg, this mouthpiece. The military committee said, we don't want war with Russia. That's not what we want. And I believe the majority of NATO recognize that they don't want direct conflict with Russia, and that Russia has changed the game that makes any continuation of the NATO commitment to Ukraine have the potential of direct conflict with Russia. So what does NATO do? I mean, the Ukrainian government's already screaming at the top of its voice about people betraying them. Where's our weaponry? Where's our weaponry? There's no weaponry. People slow down. Um, there's no weaponry. One, because they already gave all the weaponry that's available. The United States has passed a $12 billion supplement to its appropriations in support of Ukraine. This $12 billion is used to build new weapons that won't be available for until 2024 in some cases. So, there's nothing left to give Ukraine, literally. I mean, the Ukraine wants Leopard tanks, M1 tanks, and all that, but the Ukrainian military can't absorb those tanks in a viable fashion. It would just lead to the additional slaughter of Ukrainian troops. Um, but how does NATO back down? I mean, having committed this, having told their public that this is the thing. I mean, the German foreign minister just saying that she doesn't care what the German people think. She's committed to Ukraine, that our resolve will never diminish. We will continue to provide Ukraine what they need. Those statements were made before Ukrainian territory became Mother Russia. Now the question is, what do you do? You're overcommitted. Do you continue to pour weaponry into Ukraine, knowing that Ukraine is not going to back down, and therefore create the potential? Because let's say Ukraine had a success. Let's say that Kherson becomes part of Russia, but then Ukraine launches a counterattack that actually captures Kherson. What's Russia going to do? They're going to nuke Ukraine. They said they will. They will nuke it. And then what does the U.S. do? Biden and company are saying there will be catastrophic results for Russia. Well, if you inflict catastrophic results on Russia, I can pretty much guarantee Russia's going to inflict catastrophic results on you, and then the world ends. So that's that. So is NATO going to empower Ukraine, give Ukraine the silver bullet that initiates global nuclear warfare and kills everybody? Or is NATO going to find an off-ramp? And I think that's the struggle right now, is how to find an off-ramp that doesn't humiliate you anymore. Remember, just last year, in August of 2021, NATO and the United States were humiliated in Afghanistan, fleeing the Taliban. And I think we're going to be in a situation this summer, or in the coming over the winter and the summer, where NATO is going to be fleeing Ukraine, walking away from Ukraine, because there's no way NATO is going to empower Ukraine to be the person making the decision about global thermonuclear warfare. You don't want to give Ukraine that ability. You don't want to give Ukraine the capability to do that. That's a decision that's made by NATO leaders, not Zelensky and his ilk. So, that's where we're at. There's a real risk. This is why I said, forget talking about 5 minutes to midnight when we talk about the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. They publish something called the Doomsday Clock, and it's a little cute little ploy where you try to highlight the risk of the world of nuclear conflict. Say, quit playing games. We're literally at 1 second to midnight. 1 second. All it takes is one miscalculation, click, and the world's over. That's where we're at right now. Right now. And NATO has to make the decision where they want to stand. Our Russian doctrine is clear. Just like a lot of people are like, Putin's irresponsibly, waving the nuclear threat. Ask Tarek Aziz what James Baker told him when they met in Geneva on the eve of the Gulf War in 1991. The United States told Iraq straight up, if you use chemical, biological weapons against American forces, we're going to nuke you. We're going to nuke your ass. You're dead. You're gone. Finished. Well, who put the nuclear weapon on the table there? We've threatened people with nuclear weapons all the time. We've threatened Russia. What do you think the W76-2 low yield nuclear warhead is? It's on a Trident submarine. The first time that it was war gamed, the Secretary of Defense pushed a button to simulate the launch command against, what was the enemy? Russia in the Baltics. So we're the ones who put nuclear weapons out there all the time. All the Russians have done is attach it to a very realistic problem that's of NATO's own making. And so it's going to be up to NATO to decide, how and when they're going to back away from the abyss. And if they choose not to, then we're 1 second from midnight and the world ending.
Okay, I just want to say thank you once again, Scott. Um, Stay safe and stay healthy. Also, I wanted to share with you. You did an interview with U.S. Tour of Duty, and the response that you gave to the past about your past criminal stuff my wife really liked it, and she said, "Man," my wife said, "Man, the gangster came out of." She said, "The gangster came out of Scott Ritter." She said, "I love it." She was she loved your response. She was so
Well,
happy. She was so happy of your response, and she loved it. She
well, I
called she
appreciate
called
it.
she called you a gangster.
Well, I've been called worse, but no, I don't want to belabor the point, but I will say this to anybody listening: it was heartfelt, it was honest,
Yes, yes.
and I apologize for the language, but
Uh,
when you
it gets frustrating.
when
Yes,
you when you when you build up the anger and then it comes out, sometimes it comes out a little bit more crude than you would intend it to do. So, but that's the last time I'm ever going to talk about it. I
right.
keep telling
Good.
people if they ever ask a question, I say I already addressed it. Go watch the video. If you have
Yes,
children, get them out of the room because I use inappropriate language.
yes. I cut it out. I did a like an 8 minute video on it, and I it was awesome. It was an excellent response, and we appreciate you. We want to know, let you know, as other people, we love and we appreciate you, Scott Ritter, and I just want you to know that we support you, we love you, we appreciate you, and we're your biggest fans, and I'm sure everybody says that. So
Well,
with that, I just want to say thank you so much, Scott, for everything you do for us. Even for the little guys, you're approachable and you're honest. You're a man of integrity, and we thank you so much.
well, thank you very much. But
And
never forget that I'm a little guy too. I put my pants on one leg at a time. There's nothing superhuman about me. I'm just a guy that was blessed with some experiences that give me some insight into issues that are of importance. But I'm very humble by this, and I think if we ever meet, you'll realize that I'm just a guy off the street, just like you are. So we'll.
I'm gonna send you the link. Okay, I'll send you the link, and then also hopefully we can do this again next month. And I appreciate you. And stay safe and
Absolutely.
stay safe and stay healthy, Scott.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
so
much.
much. Thank you very
Okay.
much.